Snow fell quietly over the broken roads of France. It was the winter of 1944, and war weighed heavy on the land. Buildings stood like hollow bones. Smoke still rose from what had once been homes. The sky hung low and gray, as if it was tired of looking down on suffering. In the middle of that cold world, a small group of Allied medics moved slowly through the ruins. Among them was a young American nurse named Lily Carter. Her coat was too thin for the cold, and her boots had long lost their warmth, but her eyes still carried a faint light. She had seen too much to believe in miracles, yet she still believed in people. Lily had come to France after her brother died during the invasion. Before he left home, he had promised her he would come back safe. He never did. Ever since the telegram arrived, that winter morning, she had promised herself she would save others as a way to keep him alive in her memory. That promise carried her through sleepless nights, through screams from the wounded, through the endless sound of guns. Every life she saved felt like a small act of defiance against death itself. The medical truck rattled over rough ground. Beside Lily sat Captain Ethan Ward, a soldier who had joined their team as an escort. He was a quiet man, his face marked by dust and days without rest. He looked young, but already carried the calm of someone who had seen too much. His eyes were gray like the sky, and his voice when he spoke was low and steady. At first, Lily only noticed how serious he seemed. But she soon sensed there was something else, a kind of kindness that he tried to hide under his duty. He had been a schoolteacher before the war, though he rarely spoke of it. They traveled slowly, stopping often to help refugees and injured soldiers. Everywhere they went, they heard the same question. When will it end? No one had an answer. The soldiers looked to the horizon like they could see peace waiting there, but it was never that close. At night, the team built small fires near the truck to keep warm. The flames danced weakly in the wind. Ethan often kept watch while Lily treated the wounded. She worked with tired eyes and steady hands. Her fingers trembled only when she thought no one was watching. Sometimes late at night when most were sleeping, Ethan would quietly hand her a cup of coffee. They rarely spoke much then. The silence between them was comfortable, filled with unspoken understanding. One evening, a young French girl approached their camp. She held a ragged toy rabbit and asked if Lily could help her mother, who was sick in the next village. Lily and Ethan went together. The path was dark and covered in snow. They passed burned houses and bodies half buried under the white cover. No one wept for them anymore. The world had simply run out of tears. When they reached the cottage, they found the girl's mother weak with fever. Lily cleaned her wounds and gave her medicine. Ethan helped carry wood for a fire. When the woman finally opened her eyes and touched her daughter's cheek, Lily felt something warm ease inside her chest. On the way back, Ethan broke the long silence. He said he had once promised himself he would never get attached to anyone during the war, that too many good people went away and never came back. Lily listened quietly as their boots crunched on the frozen ground. When he asked her why she kept caring, she said she did not know how to stop. That answer stayed in his mind for a long time. Over the next days, their convoy passed through forests and villages torn apart by battle. They saw broken tanks, silent fields, and children playing with pieces of metal they did not understand. Danger followed them always, yet it felt far for a while because they had each other's presence. Every shared glance, every quiet word became a spark that kept them human. When they reached a destroyed church on the edge of a valley, Lily stood before it and whispered something to herself. Ethan did not ask what it was. He understood that some prayers were not meant to be shared, only felt. He turned to her, watching the faint snow settle on her hair. For a second, war seemed to step away. She smiled gently, as if trying to hold on to the brief calm before the storm began again. Neither of them knew that the mission waiting ahead would change everything. But in that short moment, under the falling snow, two souls tired of death found a reason to keep walking. The war might still rage around them, but their hearts had started to move in the same rhythm. That rhythm would soon be the only thing strong enough to face what was coming. The morning started with the sound of engines and freezing wind. Lily stood beside the truck and rubbed her hands together for warmth. The soldiers were checking their weapons, while the commander spoke quickly over the radio. The news was not good. A group of civilians was trapped behind enemy lines near the forest. The enemy had surrounded the nearby roads and time was running out. Lily listened silently as Captain Ethan Ward joined the briefing. He looked calm, but the small line between his brows showed his worry. When he walked back to her, he said softly that they were moving out in an hour. She nodded without a word and began packing bandages and medicine. The convoy set out before sunrise. The sky looked pale and empty. The truck bounced on rough ground as snowflakes swirled past the windshield. Lily sat near the window, watching broken houses flash by. Every road seemed to carry the memory of what had been lost. Ethan sat in the front seat, giving quiet directions to the driver. The air inside smelled of smoke and oil. No one spoke much. Only the sound of the engine and distant thunder of shells filled the space. In the back of the truck, a few other medics tried to keep warm under blankets. One of them, an older nurse named Grace, smiled at Lily and said that she reminded her of her daughter back home. The words felt like a small candle in the dark. Lily smiled back and said she hoped to meet the daughter one day. Grace whispered that all they had to do was survive this mission. That word survive hung in the cold air as the truck drove on. The road turned into the woods. The sound of gunfire came closer. The driver slowed down. Ethan ordered everyone to stay low. The trees seemed to swallow them. Smoke drifted through the branches. In the distance, they saw flashes of light from explosions. A few wounded soldiers were carried into the road shouting for help. Lily jumped out before Ethan could stop her. She knelt beside a man clutching his arm, his face white with pain. Ethan covered them as she worked quickly. Her hands were steady as she wrapped the wound and gave him a shot for pain. When they finally loaded the man into the truck, Ethan looked at her with quiet respect. She met his eyes for a moment and then looked away, her heart beating fast. By afternoon, the convoy reached the edge of a small village. Smoke rose from the chimneys of what few houses still stood. The refugees they were sent to rescue were hiding in the ruins of a school. The children were thin and frightened, the mothers weary and silent. Lily moved among them, checking fevers and wounds. Ethan helped carry supplies. The local man guiding them said that enemy patrols passed through often, so they had to move before night.
Ow.
The snow began again, light and cold. Lily tied scarves around the weakest children. One boy clutched her hand and refused to let go. She promised him softly that everything would be fine. As evening drew close, the villagers gathered around the truck. Ethan talked with the remaining soldiers while Lily comforted the children. A young woman told her that she had heard of a safe shelter nearby, an underground building built for air raids. That news spread quickly, and soon everyone started preparing to go there. Ethan was not sure. He had doubts about the route, but the people were desperate. He turned to Lily for her opinion. She said that the children could not spend another night in the cold and that it was worth trying. Ethan finally agreed, but his eyes stayed sharp on the horizon. The journey to the shelter began at dusk. The group walked silently under the dull light of the moon. There were about 20 of them. Lily walked near the front beside Ethan, holding a small lantern. The snow creaked under their boots. Every sound was loud in the still air. Somewhere in the distance, an owl called, startling a few children. Ethan looked over at Lily and gave her a small, reassuring smile. It was enough to steady her. She had never thought of herself as brave, but walking beside him made her feel she could face anything. When they reached the village mentioned by the woman, it was quiet and nearly destroyed. The buildings were burned and their roofs were gone. Cold wind blew through the broken windows. The guide pointed toward an old stone church at the end of the street. Inside, he said, there was a stairway that led underground to safety. The group hurried toward it, their breath misting in the cold. Lily's light flickered over the cracked walls. Despite her exhaustion, hope began to rise again. Safety sounded like a dream they had been chasing for too long. As they entered the church, Ethan felt a strange unease. He looked up at the ceiling with its broken beams and the shadows that lingered in the corners. Something in the air felt wrong. But when he saw Lily helping a small girl down the stairs with a smile full of kindness, his warning faded away. In that moment, all he saw was her resilience, her beauty in the middle of ruin, and the way she made courage look so simple. They reached the bottom of the stairway. The air grew cold and still. The door above them closed with a heavy sound. Lily turned to Ethan and whispered that at last they were safe. He looked at her and forced a smile, though something deep inside still whispered otherwise. Neither of them knew the truth waiting in the dark below, silent and patient like the earth itself. The night had fallen fully when they entered the church basement. The air was cold and smelled of soil and stone. The steps behind them creaked as the last soldier came down with the lantern. The light showed thick dust swirling in the still air. The room was large enough to hold everyone, but it was nearly empty. Broken wooden chairs lay in a corner and the floor was covered with bits of plaster. The refugees sank to the ground in weak relief.
Alice.
Lily put down her bag and began checking on the sick and injured. The children huddled close to their mothers while the grown men whispered quietly about how long they might have to stay hidden. Ethan walked around the room inspecting the walls and the doorway. He did not like small enclosed spaces. He ran his hand along the rough stones, thinking of tunnels in the past that had become graves for soldiers. But he told himself this time would be different. He believed the men who had guided them here were telling the truth. He wanted badly for Lily to be safe. When he looked back at her, she was kneeling beside an old man whose breathing was heavy. The small light from her lantern glowed over her face as she worked. For a moment it made her look like a figure painted on old glass windows, calm and steady, despite the ruin around her. The soldiers set up a small fire using bits of wood and scrap paper. The light flickered over tired faces. Grace sat beside Lily and handed her some hard bread. They ate in silence. Ethan joined them after walking another round through the basement. He said the structure seemed strong enough to hold against any attack. Lily nodded but heard something strange in his voice. He was trying to sound confident, though his eyes showed otherwise. Time passed slowly. The air grew heavier. Drops of water fell from the ceiling. Far above, they sometimes heard dull thuds, like distant thunder. The war was still raging outside. One of the younger soldiers said that maybe the enemy had moved away and they could continue their journey by morning. Many agreed. That faint hope lifted tired faces. Ethan and Lily sat near the stairway, talking quietly. He told her that before the war he used to read books to his students about courage and kindness, and many boys in his class had later joined the fight just as he had. He said he often wondered if he had told them enough about how fragile life could be. Lily listened and told him about her brother, how he used to laugh loudly at small things, how the house had felt too still after he was gone. It was a simple moment shared between two weary people who had run out of dreams but still found comfort in words. Suddenly, the heavy sound of boots echoed from above. Ethan stood up quickly. His hand went to his rifle. The refugees froze.
Oh.
Well, and I get on wherever all rolling, and I'd be wrong, Then muffled voices spoke in a language they could not clearly hear. Lily's heart pounded. She looked at Ethan, who motioned for silence. The lantern light trembled slightly as the flame wavered. After a moment, the voices faded away. Everyone released a shaky breath, yet Ethan could not let go of the sharp feeling in his chest. Something was wrong. He went up the stairs a few steps and pressed his ear against the door. He heard nothing now but the faint wind. He turned the handle gently, but it did not move. It had been locked from outside. For a few seconds, his mind refused to accept it. Then he ran back down. Lily stood waiting for his face to tell her the truth. He said quietly that the door was sealed. The words struck like a cold bullet. Grace gasped, and the refugees began whispering with fear. Lily tried to calm them. She said maybe the door had jammed because of the cold. Ethan said he would try again, climbed back up with another soldier and pushed against the door. It did not move. He hit it with the butt of his rifle until dust fell from above, but the hinges held firm. When he came down again, he looked pale. Their guide and the other men who had promised safety were gone. They had been tricked. The realization sank slowly through the group. One woman began to sob. Another clutched her child and looked at the ceiling like the stones might speak mercy. Ethan felt a heavy rage and guilt twist inside him. Lily moved to the center and spoke softly to the people, telling them they had made it through worse before and that they must keep calm. Her voice trembled, but she kept going. In her eyes there was still that same spark he had seen since the first day. He moved closer to her and said they would find another way out. They began to search the walls for any hidden exit. Their lanterns touched every corner. There were small holes where light used to pass, but no open path. The air grew colder. Dust drifted down from the ceiling as somewhere above another explosion shook the ground. Ethan looked around at the faces that stared back at him. He knew then that this place was not a shelter. It was a trap. He turned toward Lily, and their eyes met. Neither spoke. Oh, the sound of the wind outside had turned into distant thunder again. The ground trembled softly under their feet. She stepped closer and took his hand without words. In that small gesture, surrounded by fear and silence, they found a strange calm. No one wanted to believe it, but deep inside both of them knew that the world above might soon bury them beneath it. The air in the basement grew heavy as the night deepened. The only light came from the flickering lantern resting on a crate near the wall. Its glow moved across frightened faces and made the shadows seem alive. Lily sat with a small child in her arms, trying to quiet her cries. Ethan stood near the locked door, staring at it as if he could force it open with his will. The silence between the small bursts of crying and the crackling flame was deep and tense. It sounded like the whole earth was holding its breath. The old man in the corner began to cough heavily, while Grace tried to comfort him. Every sound echoed against the cold stone. Ethan turned back to them and spoke in a calm voice. He said they would not stay trapped forever, and that he would find a way out. His voice carried strength, but Lily saw the tightness in his jaw. She knew he was speaking less to comfort the others and more to keep his courage alive. She wished she could believe him without fear, but the chill in the air felt too close to truth. They began to search the basement more carefully. Ethan and two soldiers moved crates and broken furniture. Dust filled the air and made their lungs hurt. Lily joined them after laying the child beside her sleeping mother. Together they pulled loose boards from the floor, hoping for a passage or tunnel. Beneath them they found only dirt and a few bits of rotted wood. The search continued, but every attempt led nowhere. Sweat mixed with dust on their faces, and the sense of time faded. Outside they could hear low thunder. It was not a storm, but distant shelling. Each sound reached them like a slow heartbeat of danger. After hours that felt like days, they rested again. Some people prayed while others simply stared at the walls in silence. Lily sat beside Ethan near the stairs. She handed him a canteen of water. Their hands touched, and neither pulled away at once. He looked at her in the dim light. Her face was pale, but her eyes still held a soft glow. He told her she had been brave from the beginning and that her brother would be proud. The words made her throat tighten. She turned her face away so he would not see her tears. He had never spoken of her brother before, yet it felt as if he understood everything she had carried since that day. Another blast sounded from outside, much closer this time. Dust rained from the ceiling. The children screamed. The old man crossed himself in silence. Ethan jumped up and shouted for everyone to move toward the far wall. The ground shook again and stones fell from the ceiling near the stairs. Lily shielded the child with her body. When the noise stopped, the air filled with gray dust. No one spoke until Ethan called out to check if anyone was hurt. No one had serious injuries, but their fear became sharper than before. Ah! He climbed halfway up the stairs again and pounded on the door. His fist hit the wood until his knuckles bled. What? He shouted for help, but there was no reply. The sound of his voice faded into emptiness. He stood there breathing hard, his head pressed to the cold door. Then he came down slowly and sat beside Lily. He looked lost for the first time since she had known him. She reached for his hand and held it firmly as she whispered that he had done all he could. Her calm voice steadied him. The hours passed without measure. The air was thick and growing colder. The lantern light became weak. Grace's hands shook as she lit another small flame. The shadows danced over the walls as if mocking them. A man whispered that the soldiers who brought them here must have planned this. He believed they had sealed the basement to hide evidence or delay their enemies. The truth did not matter anymore. Whatever reason there had been, it had turned the place into a silent tomb. Lily began to hand out what little food remained. She broke pieces to share equally among the people. Ethan helped her, but his hands trembled. Every movement felt slower. After eating, some tried to rest while others sat staring at the door. Lily kept checking the injured, though she knew the medicine was running out. Every time she looked at Ethan, he gave her that same steady look. A look that tried to protect her from fear, even when he had none left for himself. Then a deep rumble came again from outside, louder than before. The floor shivered. The lamp fell over and went out. In sudden darkness, the cries and gasps filled the air. Ethan reached for Lily and pulled her close as part of the ceiling cracked open above them. A heavy piece of stone crushed the stairs. Dust and dirt poured down as everyone screamed. The sound became a storm of falling stone and breaking walls. Ethan threw himself over Lily to shield her. The last thing she saw before the smoke filled the air was his eyes open wide, full of fierce determination. When the noise faded, only faint moans and the smell of dust remained. The fire had gone out completely. What little light came leaked through cracks high above. Ethan coughed, calling Lily's name. She answered weakly. Her hair and face were covered in gray dust. He touched her cheek and felt tears mix with the dirt. They were both alive, but the door and stairs were gone. Around them, the others were quiet, too quiet. The air now carried the deep silence of a tomb. Ethan held her hand firmly. She turned her face toward him and whispered that she was not afraid. He answered that he was not either, because he was not alone. They stayed that way, their hands joined, while ash still drifted from above like snow. In that place where all noise had died, the heartbeat between them became the only living sound. The silence after the collapse was so deep that it almost sounded like a heavy ringing in the ears. Dust floated in the dim air, and each breath came sharp and dry. Ethan tried to stand, but pain shot through his leg. A fallen beam had pinned it down. He gritted his teeth and pushed it aside with great effort. Across from him, Lily stirred weakly, crawled to her and touched her shoulder. Her eyes opened slowly. She looked around, seeing only darkness and faint shapes rising from the rubble. For a brief moment she thought she had died. Then she felt Ethan's hand, and the world came back to her. He helped her sit up. The weak light that slipped through the cracks gave a ghostly glow to the scene. Half the group lay still, too still. The few who were alive whispered prayers or coughed in the dust. Lily reached for her medical bag, though it was torn and nearly empty. She moved from one person to another, doing what she could with her bare hands. Ethan followed her steps, steadying her when she stumbled. She did not cry. Not yet. Her mind was fixed on helping. The air was cold and carried the smell of earth and smoke. Ethan looked at the ceiling that had once been the church floor. He could see narrow openings where dim light fell through, but not wide enough for them to climb out. He stood silent for a while, staring at the thin threads of light above them. Then he said quietly that at least they had not been broken apart. Lily looked at him, the corners of her mouth trembling into a sad smile. She said that maybe that was enough for now. Hours passed, but it felt like days. The sound of distant fighting faded far away. No one came. Lily leaned against the wall, her head resting on her arm. Her thoughts drifted to home and the fields near her family's farmhouse. She pictured her brother laughing as he waved to her from across a golden field. She wondered if he had felt fear at the end or if he had thought of her. When she felt Ethan's hand on her sleeve, she opened her eyes. He said softly that he was sorry he had brought her into this. She shook her head and told him not to say that again. Well, without him, she said, she would have given up long ago. A faint rumble traveled through the ground again. Dust fell from above in gentle clouds. The structure was weakening a little more each moment. Lily reached for her locket and opened it with trembling fingers. Inside was a small photo of her brother. She showed it to Ethan. He smiled at it and then looked at her. He told her he had no family left to return to, and that if he found a way out, he would stay close to the families of those who had been lost to make sure their names were not forgotten. She nodded slowly and told him he would live to do that. Yet deep in her heart she knew he would never see the light again. As the hours turned into another painful night, the air grew thinner. The small fires they had built died out. People were quiet now, too tired to speak. Ethan and Lily sat near one another, their shoulders touching. He pulled his coat around her when he saw her shivering. She thanked him and leaned closer. They spoke in low voices about home, about ordinary things like rain and music and the smell of bread. Every word felt like a fight against fading hope. Ethan's strength began to fade faster than hers. He could barely move his injured leg. He told her that if she ever made it out, she had to promise to live well and tell their story. She promised without hesitation. She held his hand tighter and pressed it to her heart. The sound of his breathing became slow but peaceful. Lily tried to keep him awake by talking, but his eyes began to close. She whispered that he was brave, that he had given her more hope than she thought possible in such a dark world. He smiled faintly and whispered that meeting her had made all of it worth the cost. When at last his hand went still, Lily did not let go. She kept holding it as the cold drifted deeper around her. She leaned her head against his shoulder and listened to the faint sound of wind above the ruins. Her body was weak, her heart quiet. She closed her eyes and pictured an open field full of sunlight where no guns sounded, no fear remained, and she could walk beside him freely. That vision stayed with her as her breathing slowed to rest. Days later, a group of Allied scouts arrived at the destroyed village. The soldiers cleared the rubble from the old church. It took hours to reach the basement. When the first sliver of daylight fell onto the broken stones, one of the men saw them. They were seated side by side among the fallen beams. Lily's hand rested gently in Ethan's, and the silver locket lay between them. Inside it were the small photo and tiny carved initials that time would never erase. News spread quietly among the soldiers who found them. They spoke of the nurse and the captain, who had chosen duty and love until the final breath. The locals who later rebuilt the church would leave a small lantern burning there every winter night in their memory. People said that when the wind passed through the valley, it carried the soft sound of footsteps. Some believed that two souls still walked there, not as victims of war, but as a promise that love could outlive even death. Their story became a whisper of hope, a reminder that even in ruin the human heart could still remember the light.